Yes, you are in. You are trying to create the best environment and opportunities for your toddler to develop in each area of early childhood development. But it's a bit confusing. I mean, what does sensory processing mean anyway? And receptive and expressive language and milestones? Mama, stop your Google searching and stay tuned. Today we're going to be going over 10 confusing terms that you will be hearing about your toddler's child development. Hi, I'm Holly, a pediatric occupational therapist and mom to 2 adorable toddlers. Here on my channel, I aim to empower fellow moms like you to understand their toddler's development better so you can worry less and play more. So let's dive into those 10 confusing terms. If I don't mention one that you've been hearing a lot and you want to understand it better, please comment below. Okay, so first off, we're going to be going into milestones and norms. A milestone is basically something that we're expecting your toddler to learn at a certain age. How these were developed is over many studies in different contexts, different generations, and different groups of people that have been studied, and within each of these they found that a child generally at a certain age learns a certain skill. So for example, they say that 80% of children have had their first step, not walking, but first step by age 1. Your child might be way ahead of that, they might be a bit below that, or they might be just there. Next term is developmental delay. What does that really mean? It basically means that your child hasn't reached the milestone or in the same time that would be expected. So when we're looking at developmental delay, it's really important to look at whether it's a developmental delay in just one thing or one area, or if you're seeing delay across the board in a few different areas. So for example, the developmental norm for speech at age 2 is that a child would know around 60 words and that they would be beginning to make short sentences of say 2 to 3 words. If a child has reached say 45 words and they're not quite putting together sentences, but they have really good understanding of language, they've developed well in every other area, they've met the milestones or even exceeded milestones, then we would say that that is a delay, a very minor delay, just in terms of speech. If, for example, the child is getting say 45 words at age 2, but then we see actually they are still not running, perhaps they have difficulty focusing on one task, then we would start looking at whether that delay is more global. Adjusted or corrected age. This is a term that we hear when looking at the development of premature babies, and it's basically the age that they were born minus the months that they were premature. It's really important to consider this when looking at their development, because a premature baby might not be reaching the milestone exactly according to their chronological age, but rather according to their adjusted age. Most pediatricians and therapists start weaning off the thinking of an adjusted age or expect that a child has caught up to their chronological age by the time they're around 2 years old. Screening or assessment. So this is something that is done by an occupational therapist or a psychologist or a speech therapist or a physiotherapist. And it's not the same as, say, the questions that your nurse may ask you at a wellness check, but it's really an in-depth look at exactly how your child is progressing according to their development. So it's something that normally we use a standardized assessment, and we're really looking at your child compared to the norm. It's something that isn't just a few questions, it's really an assessment, it's a thorough look at their development, and it can take from say 30 minutes to a few different sessions or a few different meetings. A late bloomer. So I added this one because I hear it a lot in the park. Oh, don't worry that your child's not speaking at 2 years. My hairdresser's son's brother had a baby that didn't speak until they were 2 years and 1 month. They didn't say a single word, and suddenly they were speaking in 5 to 6 word sentences. Have you heard that? Well, I think it's really important that when we look at a child that is missing a milestone or is delayed in a milestone, and when we start considering, do I need to take them to therapy? Should I speak to my pediatrician? That we look at, is this just one area and are they just slightly delayed? Or is this an overall thing that they're possibly a little bit delayed in many milestones? Is late blooming a thing? Yes, it is, but it's really important to look at development with a critical eye. Sensory processing. So, believe it or not, this is not just about sensory bins, although I love them too. Sensory processing is basically how your nervous system responds to the senses that it receives. So the classic example is you put your hand on a hot stove, your nervous system says, whoa, hot, and there's a motor response. Your hand moves, it lifts up. When we talk about children with problems with sensory processing, what we're talking about is that the sensory information goes in, but the brain doesn't necessarily understand how to interpret it properly. So the response can be either over or under exaggerated. For example, a child that just really doesn't like to have itchy clothes, like tags, really bother them. And I'm not talking about just like, it irritates me a little bit and I don't really notice it, but you know, if you asked me about it, maybe I would say, yeah, it bothers me. I'm saying we consider that this is possibly a sensory problem when that tag is really irritating and bothering to the point that we can't focus on a task. Muscle tone. Okay, maybe you've heard this term yet, maybe you haven't, but it definitely comes up a lot in child development. The difference between muscle tone and muscle strength is that muscle strength it's the ability to contract and create force, is muscle strength. Muscle tone, on the other hand, is the resting tension in that muscle. So it's more of a neurological concept. When a child has low muscle tone, they battle to maintain an upright posture, and this affects every aspect of their learning. Muscle tone is something that isn't treated by going to the gym. It's something that you need an occupational therapist or a physiotherapist to have a look at. Expressive and receptive language refers to the expression of language, so the actual speech, the actually being able to talk to somebody, and receptive language refers to the understanding of language. This we see when possibly instructions aren't being followed or that a word isn't really understood. So when we look at child development, it's important to see both of them, because sometimes children may have a problem with just verbalizing speech, and that can mean X, and sometimes it might be a problem with verbalizing and understanding, and that might mean Y. So it's, as parents, always important to kind of understand and look at both of those things. Age-appropriate activities might be a term that you've heard several times, but without much explanation. So what does it really mean? It means that the activity or the opportunity for play that is presented to a child or toddler is appropriate for their age. So it's not requiring skills or abilities that they don't have yet. Whether they want to or not, they're just not developed. So for an example of this is that you don't teach a 1-year-old to drive a car, right? Because obviously they can't reach the pedals and they don't have any understanding of what's going on. Other ways that we see this is when we present those really cute Pinterest or Insta-worthy activities to our toddler that have, say, a 5-step process to creating a beautiful craft, and your toddler tears the paper in half and runs away, because 5 steps for, say, a 2-year-old is not an appropriate thing to be asking them to do. They don't understand it and they don't have the skills yet to be able to do that activity. An example of a positive, appropriate age activity for a toddler, say an 18th month old, is fetch and bring a ball or to kick a ball around the backyard. The prefrontal cortex. If you have a 2-year-old, I'm sure you've heard of this term. So the prefrontal cortex is basically an area within the frontal lobe of your brain. It only fully develops when you are 25 years old, so for your toddler it's a way to go. It is the center that controls lots of complex actions like planning and also personality. It's also the place that needs to develop for emotional regulation and impulse control. So now you know all the terms and you've watched the previous video on the areas of development for toddlers, but you're still not exactly sure whether your toddler is developing correctly. You think that he seems a little bit different to the other kids at the park, but you can't quite put your finger on it, and you're not sure if it's just part of personality or if it's something to be concerned about. And if it is a concern, then where do you go? What do you do with that? In this next video, we are going to be diving into some of the red flags to look out for in your child's development.